The mirror reflected a version of me I barely recognized. The red dress clung to me with quiet confidence, though my hands betrayed the tremor beneath my calm exterior. The room smelled faintly of lavender and rain, a scent I always associated with both beginnings and endings. It was supposed to be just another evening, yet tonight carried a weight I couldn't name. My name is Helen, and this was the night I had waited for since the day I met Mark. I could still remember that first encounter. It wasn't grand, or cinematic, just ordinary, like two strangers crossing paths on an ordinary street. He had dropped his coffee, muttered something under his breath, and smiled when our eyes met. That smile, it had this quiet honesty, the kind that disarmed all my defenses. Now, months later, I was standing in front of a mirror, fixing my hair, for our first night together. Not just another date, but something that felt like a doorway. A step into a deeper, unspoken promise. Outside, the city glowed. The rain had stopped, and the streets shimmered like melted gold under the lamplight. My heart beat faster with every tick of the clock. Mark would arrive any minute. I sat down, at the edge of the bed, my reflection watching me from across the room. "You're ready," I whispered to myself, though the words trembled like paper in the wind. My fingers brushed against the necklace he'd given me last week. A small silver heart, nothing extravagant, but it carried a warmth that made me feel safe. Then came the sound of the doorbell. Soft, yet enough to send my pulse into chaos. Mark stood in the doorway, rain still glistening on his coat. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the noise of the world fell away. There was only silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. "You look beautiful," he said. His voice wasn't smooth like in the movies. It cracked slightly, sincere and unpolished. That made it real. I smiled, stepping closer, the air between us thick with nervous energy. He took my hand, and for a second, I thought he could feel the tremor in my fingers, but he only squeezed gently, grounding me. "I brought wine," he said, holding up a bottle like it was an offering. We laughed, maybe too hard, but laughter was a relief, a release from the storm of anticipation that had built between us. Dinner was quiet at first. We talked about work, about how his boss had finally approved his project, about the movie I'd watched alone the night before. Ordinary things. But underneath every word was a hum, a rhythm of something neither of us dared to name aloud. At one point, our eyes met across the table. The candlelight flickered, painting gold across his face. And in that light, I saw the man I had fallen for. Not perfect, but kind. With a soul that carried a quiet sadness I always wanted to understand. "Do you remember?" I asked softly. "The first time we met?" He smiled. "How could I forget? You laughed when I spilled coffee all over myself." "You looked terrified," I teased. "I was," he admitted. "You looked like someone I could fall in love with, and that scared me." The words hung in the air, fragile and beautiful. I felt my breath catch. Love. He said it like a truth too heavy to hide anymore. After dinner, we sat by the window. The city below us pulsed with life, but up here, it was quiet. The hum of the street was distant, softened by the rhythm of rain returning. Mark looked at me, his eyes searching. "You're quiet tonight." "I'm just thinking," I said. "About what?" "About how moments like this don't come twice." He leaned in, his hand brushing against mine. "Then let's not waste it." My heart skipped. The words felt like a spark in the dark. I could hear the rain tapping gently against the glass, a melody to the silence between us. When he kissed me, it wasn't like in the movies. No sweeping music, no perfect timing. It was real, almost hesitant, a meeting of nerves and longing. But it felt right, like we were finally stepping into the story we'd both been writing silently in our hearts. I closed my eyes and felt the world slow down. Every sound, every heartbeat, every breath became sharper, clearer. When the kiss broke, we stayed close, forehead to forehead. Neither of us spoke. Words would have ruined the purity of that stillness. For the first time, I realized how fragile love can be. Not fragile because it's weak, but because it's made of moments that never come back once they pass. The rain grew heavier outside. Mark stood up and turned on the old record player. The soft crackle of vinyl filled the room, followed by a slow, tender melody. "Dance with me," he said, extending a hand. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because my legs felt like glass. Still, I took his hand. He pulled me close and we swayed, just two silhouettes in the warm light of a single lamp, shadows dancing on the walls. It was awkward at first. My feet stumbled, his laugh filled the space, and soon I was laughing too. The kind of laughter that feels like oxygen after too long underwater. And then, quietly, the laughter faded. All that remained was the music and the steady rhythm of our hearts. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. I nodded. "A little." "Me too," he whispered. He brushed a strand of hair from my face. His touch was gentle, careful, as if he feared breaking something precious. In that moment, I realized this night wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about grand gestures or flawless romance. It was about two imperfect people finding courage in each other's eyes. As the record ended, silence wrapped around us once again. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The night stretched ahead, quiet, uncertain, and infinite. Mark smiled, that same quiet smile from the day we met, and said, "Helen, whatever happens tonight, thank you for trusting me." I felt tears press behind my eyes. "I always did," I whispered. The candle flickered, the rain softened, and in the glow of that small room, love felt less like a story and more like a promise. The candle had burned halfway down, a thin thread of smoke curling toward the ceiling. The air was warm now, not from the heater, but from something unseen. Something alive. Mark stood by the window again, his back to me, his silhouette cut sharp against the city's faint glow. The rain had softened to mist, silvering the glass, painting streaks across his reflection. I watched him in silence. The way his shoulders rose and fell, the way he ran a hand through his hair when lost in thought. Small habits I had come to love. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, my voice quiet, unsure if it would reach him. He turned slowly, his eyes catching the lamplight. How moments like this can feel so still and so loud at the same time. I smiled faintly. "That's poetic," he shrugged. "I guess love makes poets of us all." I looked down at my hands, tracing the rim of my glass. The red wine had gone still, the reflection of the candle trembling on its surface. "Do you ever wonder," I said softly, "why we're afraid of silence?" He moved closer, sitting on the arm of the chair across from me. "Because silence tells the truth," he said, "and the truth isn't always kind." His words lingered in the air. There was something in them, a hint of sadness, a weight he carried quietly. I wanted to ask, but part of me feared the answer. Instead, I asked, "Tell me about your scars." He looked surprised, then smiled faintly, a shadow crossing his face. "You mean these?" He pointed to a thin line on his wrist, barely visible under the lamplight. I nodded. He took a deep breath. "That one's from when I tried to fix my father's motorcycle. I was 16, thought I could handle it. I couldn't. The engine slipped, cut me deep. My dad wasn't mad, though. He just laughed and said, 'Now you'll never forget to respect the machine.' I smiled. He sounds kind. He was. Until he wasn't. The shift in his tone was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The quiet ache behind the words. I wanted to reach for his hand, but something held me back. Maybe it was respect for the space he needed, or maybe I was just afraid to touch the pain still raw in him. "What about you?" he asked suddenly. "You've got that look. like someone who hides 1,000 stories behind one smile. I laughed softly. Maybe I do. He leaned forward. Then tell me one. I hesitated. There were stories I hadn't told anyone, not because they were dark, but because they were mine, fragile and unpolished. When I was little, I began, my mother used to tell me to write letters to myself. She said one day when I'd forget who I was, I could read them and remember. That's beautiful, he said. It was, I said, until she stopped reminding me. Then one day I realized I didn't know what to write anymore. He was quiet. The rain outside whispered against the glass. A rhythm between our breaths, maybe tonight, he said softly. You'll find something worth writing again. Something in his voice cracked open a small door inside me. I hadn't expected that, to feel seen so completely, so suddenly. Mark stood and walked toward the record player again. The vinyl crackled to life, the melody slow and soft. Something old, something tender. He extended his hand toward me like before. Dance with me, Helen. I took his hand without hesitation this time. The floor was cool beneath my bare feet, the world outside fading into the steady rhythm of our steps. We moved slowly, swaying to music only we could fully hear. His heartbeat thudded softly against my temple. My head rested on his shoulder, and for a moment, I felt safe. The kind of safe that comes not from being untouched, but from being understood. When the song ended, neither of us let go. We stood there, breathing in sync, wrapped in a silence that didn't need to be broken. Do you believe in fate? He asked suddenly, his voice low. I don't know, I said. Maybe I used to. And now? Now I believe in choices. In people finding each other because they decide to, not because the stars tell them to. He smiled faintly. You're braver than you think, or more scared than I admit. That too. We both laughed, and it felt like the night had softened around us again. Then his gaze shifted, a seriousness returning to his eyes. Helen, he said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. My stomach tightened. What is it? He hesitated as if measuring each word. Before I met you, I wasn't sure I was capable of this anymore. Of feeling something real. Something real. Love, he said simply. I thought I'd lost that part of myself. I didn't speak. I just watched him, every muscle in his face drawn tight with honesty. What changed? I asked finally. You did. The words were so soft I almost didn't hear them. He stepped closer, his voice trembling now. You made me want to be seen again. To try again. The vulnerability in his tone broke something open inside me. I reached up, touched his cheek, a small, trembling gesture. He leaned into it, eyes closing for a heartbeat. We stayed that way, two people suspended in a fragile moment of truth. Then, without speaking, we sat down together on the couch. The room felt smaller now, not in space but in intimacy. Mark's fingers brushed mine, tentative, careful. You're shaking again, he whispered. I know, I said, almost laughing. It's not fear. It's just everything. He nodded, understanding without needing explanation. You don't have to rush it. We've got time, do we? I asked quietly. He looked away. I hope so. There was something behind that answer, something I couldn't quite name, but I didn't press. Some truths needed to be earned slowly, like trust. We sat there, the candlelight painting soft gold on his skin. The world outside could have vanished, and I wouldn't have noticed. When I leaned against him, his arm came around me naturally, as if it had always belonged there. His breath brushed against my hair, slow and steady. For a while, we said nothing. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was tender, the kind that lives between people who don't need words to feel close. My thoughts wandered, to the girl in the mirror from earlier that evening, nervous and uncertain. I realized she was still here, still trembling, but now she wasn't alone. Mark shifted slightly, whispering, I'm glad you're here. I am too, I said. More than you know. He smiled, that quiet, imperfect smile that seemed to hold the whole night together. The clock ticked toward midnight. The candle burned lower. And in that small apartment, the world felt both infinite and fragile. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the rain, the record's faint hiss, and Mark's heartbeat steady beneath my ear. It struck me then. Love wasn't about fireworks or destiny. It was about the quiet courage to stay, to show up. To breathe through the silence together. The night stretched on, but it didn't feel like it was slipping away. It felt like it was holding us gently, like a secret not ready to be told. And in that secret, beneath the fading glow of candlelight, I felt something new awaken. Not passion, not desire, but a promise. A promise that this was only the beginning. The rain had stopped by dawn. A pale light spilled through the curtains, soft as breath, touching the floor where our shadows had danced just hours ago. The candle was nothing but a pool of wax now, its flame long gone. The record had stopped spinning, leaving behind only silence and the faint hum of the world returning. Mark was still asleep beside me, his breathing steady, one arm draped loosely over me. For a moment, I just watched him. The way the early light traced the curve of his jaw, the calm that softened his face. In sleep, he looked younger, almost fragile. It was strange how a single night could change everything. Or maybe it didn't change us. Maybe it just revealed what was already there. I slipped out of bed quietly and walked toward the window. The city was waking up, cars humming in the distance, birds stitching song into the quiet. My reflection in the glass looked different. Not transformed exactly, but grounded, like I had stepped through a doorway into myself. I remembered the first time Mark told me he didn't believe in permanence. "Nothing lasts," he had said once, half joking, half serious. Not love, not promises, not even good coffee. At the time, I'd laughed. But now, looking out at the morning sky, I realized he hadn't meant it cynically. He meant it truthfully, that maybe the beauty of life wasn't in its permanence, but in how fragile it was. Behind me, I heard him stir. "You're up early," he murmured, his voice heavy with sleep. "I couldn't sleep," I said, turning with a small smile. He propped himself on one elbow, watching me. "You look different. How so?" He shrugged. "Like someone who's seen the truth and decided to stay anyway." I laughed softly. "That sounds dramatic." "Maybe," he said, "but it's true." He got up and walked toward me, wrapping his arms around me from behind. The warmth of his skin pressed against my back, grounding me in the moment. For a while, we stood there silently, watching the sun climb above the skyline. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" I asked quietly. "Every day," he said. "But not in a fearful way. Just aware." "Of what?" "That time doesn't wait," he said. "And that some moments deserve to be lived fully, even if they don't last forever." His honesty always startled me, not because it was poetic, but because it was raw. He spoke like a man who had learned to live with ghosts and still chose to open his heart. We spent the morning wrapped in simplicity, coffee brewing, laughter spilling over half-burnt toast, the air still heavy with last night's quiet magic. At one point, I caught him staring at me, his expression distant. "What?" I asked. He hesitated. "You remind me of something I lost a long time ago." "What's that?" "Peace," he said simply. I didn't know how to respond. The weight of his words filled the space between us. But I reached across the table, touched his hand, and said softly, "Then maybe you didn't lose it. Maybe it just found its way back." He smiled, a small, tired smile that said more than words ever could. Hours passed like seconds. The day felt suspended, caught between what was and what might be. But as the afternoon light shifted, so did something in him. I noticed it when his laughter began to fade sooner, when his gaze lingered too long on nothing at all. "What's wrong?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nothing," but I could see it, that quiet storm behind his eyes. "Mark," I said, "don't do that. Don't hide." He looked at me for a long time before finally speaking. "I have to leave soon." The words hit like cold water. "Leave? What do you mean?" I got an offer, overseas. A long-term project, it's everything I've been working for. And when were you planning to tell me? Tonight, he said softly. After? After. The word carried so much finality that my chest ached. So last night, I said, my voice trembling. Was goodbye? No, he said quickly, reaching for me. God, no. It wasn't goodbye. It was... He stopped, struggling for words. It was real. That's why it's so hard to say this. I turned away, tears blurring the edges of the room. Then why didn't you tell me before? Because I didn't want the night to be about leaving, he said. I wanted it to be about us, about something worth remembering. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my breath. The world outside kept moving, oblivious to the quiet heartbreak inside these walls. He came closer, his voice low. Helen, I didn't plan to fall for you. But I did. And that's what scares me. Because now I have something to lose. I looked up at him, tears catching the morning light. Then stay, he shook his head. You know I can't. Then take me with you, I whispered, half hoping, half desperate. He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. You have your life here. Your work, your world. I can't ask you to give that up. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, I said, Then what are we supposed to do? He took my hand gently. We remember. We live, and maybe we meet again. The simplicity of it broke me more than any grand speech could have. That night, we sat by the window one last time, the city lights flickering below. Neither of us spoke. Words had become too small for what we felt. He traced slow circles on the back of my hand, the same way he had that first evening when everything was new. The record played softly in the background. The same song, the same melody. It felt like time was folding back on itself, giving us one last dance. Promise me something, he said finally. What? Don't close your heart when I'm gone. I swallowed hard. That's not something I can promise easily. Try anyway, he said, his voice breaking. The hours slipped away. We didn't notice when the music stopped or when the candle burned out again. All we knew was that dawn would come too soon. When it did, he kissed me gently. Not like the first kiss, which was nervous and new, but like a memory being sealed. A quiet, final kiss that said everything words couldn't, and then he left. The sound of the door closing was soft, almost kind. But it echoed through the apartment like thunder. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the empty space where he had been. The sunlight crept slowly across the floor, touching the red dress hanging by the chair, the one I'd worn that first night. It looked different now, softer somehow. As if it had lived through something, just like me. Days turned into weeks. I went back to work, to life, to the rhythm of the world, but some nights when the rain returned, I'd find myself staring out the same window, wine glass in hand, the record player quiet in the corner, and every time, I'd hear his voice in my memory, soft, earnest, trembling. Moments like this don't come twice. He was right. They don't, but maybe that's the point. Maybe love isn't about forever. Maybe it's about the moments that shape us, the people who walk into our lives, change us and leave us more awake than before. One evening, months later, I found the courage to open my mother's old box of letters. Blank pages stared back at me untouched. I picked up a pen and began to write. Dear Helen, I wrote, you are not the same woman who waited in front of the mirror in a red dress. You are stronger now, softer too. You've learned that love isn't always meant to stay. Sometimes it's meant to teach. And sometimes that's enough. The ink bled slightly into the paper. I smiled. Outside, the rain began again, soft, familiar, unending. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, letting the rhythm of it fill the silence. In the reflection, I saw myself, not broken, not waiting, but alive. And for the first time since that night, I whispered his name without pain. Mark, it felt like a prayer, not a wound, because the truth is, he didn't take love with him when he left. He left it here, In the small moments, in the red dress, in the music, in the way the rain still sounded like memory. And though that night was our first, in many ways, it was also my beginning. It was also my beginning.